we shouldn't think of hallucinations as just this sort of random event. It's an engineering flaw in the system. It's the way the system is built. So now we know that it's just not going to, happen. It's a flaw. So when does that flaw manifest itself?
Good day and welcome to the Wealthy Entrepreneur Podcast. I am your host, Bob Gauvreau. It is great to have you with me here today. Today, we are going to talk about all things legal tech, legal space, law firm, legal professionals, law careers. It's going to be exciting. We're going to talk about all the different things that could be impacting this industry, specifically focused on technology. But before we get started, I want to remind you that this is the place where we dissect the elements that contribute to entrepreneurial success, from mindset and leadership to profits and revenue. Now, today, I'm excited to share and introduce you to Steve Embry, a lawyer, a writer, a thought leader at the intersection of technology and the legal profession. He's the voice behind Tech Law Crossroads, a no-nonsense platform exploring how innovation is reshaping the practice of law. On that note, we're diving into legal tech today. What's real, what's hype, and how law firms can adopt to stay competitive and profitable. So without any further ado, I want to invite Stephen Embry onto the show, and excited to share his insights with you today. Steve, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And as we sort of chatted before we jumped on, reading through your bio of some of the experience and knowledge that you have and the insights that I'm excited that you're going to bring to the audience today, it's a little overwhelming. I was almost late for the podcast today, having to go through all this detail, but super excited to have you join. And maybe you can kick us off, Steve. Just share a little bit about your journey, how you got started, and what brought you to where you are today.
Sure. I got out of law school, 4 years ago than I like to think, and wanted to work for a larger firm, and went to work for a larger firm and had a good experience. I was just in the wrong city. I didn't like the place where I was, and my wife wanted to move closer to home. So we moved back to closer to home, and I was in a firm that it just didn't work out. Their practice criteria and their business development criteria were just not consistent with what I wanted to. So I quit, which, looking back on it now, I'm thinking, what was I thinking?
That can't possibly be true. That can't be true.
But it all worked out. And then I got with another firm that was more positive. And then somewhere along the way, I was placed on a team of people that were working on mass tort defense, very cutting edge, high exposure kinds of cases all over the country. And so I said, this is for me. And I set sail after that to develop my expertise in that area, and gradually worked my way up till I had my own clients and my own practice. And that's what I did most of my career. And I would point out that a lot of that, doing that involved a lot of risk. They were calculated risks, but, I would take financial risks. I would take, make trips to see clients, try to develop things, try to work on my expertise. And it worked out. And one of the lessons I learned from that is, particularly looking at younger lawyers, is you really need to become an entrepreneur with what you want to do with your life and career. And not, it's easy when you're in a large firm to think I'm just an associate in a firm. I have no business development, no origination. Maybe that'll come someday. But if you really need to take charge of what you're doing for yourself, to get where you want to go and achieve some success. Anyway, I did that for a number of years, and then maybe 10 years ago or so, I left the practice, or left the firm that I was with, amicably, by the way. I mean, it was everybody was cool with it. Still have a lot of friends there. And it wasn't because I hated the practice of law. It was because I had developed sort of this interest by necessity in technology, how to use technology. Because keep in mind, as a mass tort defense lawyer from Louisville, Kentucky, you better be willing to work remotely because you ain't going to do a lot of cases in your hometown. I had one or two in the state, but over however many years, but it all involved travel. So it was I came to technology basically by necessity to do the kind of work I wanted to do, and I began writing about it and founded my own blog, which I still have, Tech Law Crossroads. And I became, that was more fun. And I'd reached the stage in my career where I could do that full time if I wanted to. And so I left the practice of law. I still practice some on sort of advisory issues. If somebody a client wants some advice about how to handle a large case or serial litigation, I'm available to do that. If somebody calls me and says, we'd like for you to take a deposition, I'm like, no, not going to do that. Yeah, and it's sort of beyond my point in having access to the tools to do it with, particularly these days. So I write. I'm involved in industry organizations, bar associations, do presentations. Every now and then somebody will say, oh, it must be nice being retired. And I'll say, who the hell are you talking about, man? I know how many hours I spent last year on stuff, and it sure doesn't look like I'm retired. but it's the stuff that I love doing. So there's not been one day that I've had since I left full-time practice that I've regretted, making the decision. I think I add some value to people, and particularly with respect to somebody that's actually practiced for as long as I have and was in firm management and client development, business development, understands the business of law, at least that I was familiar with, understands clients. And there's not too many people in the legal technology space, writing space, that have had that kind of experience and background. So, it's been a fun journey, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And so it's interesting. You said something right out of the gates that resonated with me. Before I got started, I worked at a large multinational firm as well. And, it's interesting, talking to the young lawyer or the young accountant who may be listening, or even the young entrepreneur who's working at an office, who's just waiting for their moment. It's amazing to think, back where I was, the dream was to be the partner at that large firm, right? And that was the dream. Before you got started, that was the dream. And it sounded like similar to you. But then when you got there, you realized, the alignment of values and direction of where I wanted to go is maybe a different trajectory than where this firm is going. How hard was it for you to sort of make that decision and say, you know what, as much as this was the dream, I need to do this for me and for my future?
Looking back on it, of course, in hindsight, things don't look as bad as they looked at the time. But I started with a firm that was very forward-looking and very aggressive about business development, and very much, by the way, into automation, automating tasks. And the work funny story about the firm, I was assigned to a sort of it was a federal black lung defense program, and that involved hundreds of cases, multiple clients, lots of letters, a lot of communications, lots of filings, and it was a task to keep up with it. And one day, my administrative assistant, they were called secretaries back then, she came in and she said, I've been kind of watching what you're doing here. And she said, I think we can automate some of this stuff that you have to get out, and it'll save you all this time. And my reaction at the time was, please help, which, I've since learned that there are a lot of lawyers that would have said, oh, you're just a dumb secretary. What do you know? Right. But so she put together this program, and we automated stuff, and I'd get in the office at 8:30 and go home at 4:30, and all my compatriots were, busting their butts trying to figure out how we did this. And so when I left the firm, I actually went to the managing partner and I said, this person has done this, set this program up. I really think she needs to be a paralegal. And they took my word for it and made her a paralegal. In fact, she became the chief paralegal of the law firm after I left. So that was the kind of background I've came out of. And then I went to a firm that was completely different. Everybody in the firm, it was a smaller firm, everybody in the firm went to either Harvard or UVA, University of Virginia Law School. Weren't particularly enamored with somebody from University of Kentucky. And and it was just very demeaning, sort of miserable kind of place to work. And I knew, I think, Bob, I knew I had some talents, and I really felt like, based on my experience at the other firm, that I would be okay because I could latch on and do things if I got myself in the right spot. So I made some networking outreaches, and it wasn't like I was just quitting with no hope of what's going to happen tomorrow. I had some ideas, and fortunately they panned out. But
Absolutely.
I mean, sometimes you just have to make those decisions. The worst decisions I think people make sometimes is trying to hang on too long with something they know is not working. And I've seen that with lawyers. I've seen it. Law firms are notorious with personnel decisions in that regard. And it's sometimes you just have to cut and go. And that's what I did. And fortunately, it all worked out.
Yeah, and you sort of referenced as well, like educated risks, right? Like educated risks. I think a lot of people think to, entrepreneurship or jumping out and starting your own firm. It's like, oh, I'm just going to take the leap. It's like, well, have you planned this out? Have you set yourself up for success? You do want them to be educated risks. You don't want to be just hopping into something without an idea of how you get started. So I can appreciate that as well. I think a lot of people, they jump into things not really fully understanding, just with an idea of, hey, I think I can make this work. I'm not sure how, but I'm going to jump.
Right.
And
yeah.
right.
At one point in my career, I had this idea that we would take our team and create our own firm and just do mass tort work and not have to fool with all the stuff that the rest of the firm. And my mentor and older partner that I was working with, I was a partner at the time too. So I pitched this idea to him, and he said, "Well, that's really great." He said, "Let me ask you one thing. How are we going to make payroll the first month when we don't have any revenue coming in because we've sent the bills and come back yet?" I went, "Oh, crap." Jeez, I hadn't thought of that one. But so to your point, I mean, there are a lot of considerations when you want to do that. Now, having said that, it's much easier these days because of all the tools, technological tools and AI tools that are out there to do that. But it does, it takes some planning. And, I came away from all of that with a greater appreciation of the firm that I was with because their financial wherewithal and backing enabled lots of things to be done. And but yeah, you're right. It's you don't just jump. You think a little bit before you take the leap.
Absolutely. And then you've sort of referenced legal tech a few times. When was the moment, professionally for you, that you realized technology was going to ultimately fundamentally reshape the legal profession as it has? When did you really think about that? Because it sounds like you were maybe an early pioneer.
And I've told this story many times. I don't know that it was that this happened when this happened that I understood that technology was going to change the practice of law. I understood it was going to change my practice of law. And so what happened was I had my wife and I and our two kids, we were on the way to a vacation in Florida, and we were driving because I was still I might have been a third or fourth year associate. I can't remember exactly. And my wife was driving, had a 5-year-old and 3-year-old fighting, and screaming, throwing stuff in the back seat, a lot of disruption. And I was working on this brief that I had to get out. I had papers everywhere, sort of screaming and biting people's heads off. And my wife said, "Well, take a break, read that legal periodical." And the legal periodical was American Lawyer, which was a paper periodical. And there was an article in there about Fred Bartlett, who's a Chicago litigator, founded Bartlett and Beck. And he said, yeah, they were interviewing him. He said, yeah, I'm at my condo in Colorado overlooking the mountains, working remotely on a brief. And I looked at all my papers and I said, that's for me. That's where I want to go. So, and I was just at the time, I was just beginning my career in the mass tort field and working remotely. And so I latched on to technology because of the freedom that it gave me to pursue the practice I wanted to do and pursue it from virtually anywhere, even back in those days when it was much harder than it is today. But so yeah, I at that moment when I recognized that, I thought that's where the practice is going to go, and that's where we're going to end up. If you want to be something other than a local lawyer just doing local work, which is fine. I don't mean to denigrate that, but for me at the time, I had to use those tools to get where I wanted to go.
Right.
And so I got a chuckle. I was working as my kids got older, and I got a lot of my own work. I'd work at home 3 days a week, even when nobody else in the world did that. My partners all thought I was just goofing off, at least until they got the revenue. The bills came rolling in, the money came rolling in. They said, "Well, Steve, I guess
you're
if you
okay. Yeah,
if you
you're
want to
doing
work
fine.
at home, go ahead." But I got to do a lot of things with my kids because of that. Because as when you work remotely, you're able to structure your time much easier than when you're in the office. And so when it all came, when the COVID hit and everybody was going, how are we going to work remotely? It was it's no big deal.
I've been doing this for years.
Right. Yeah. I don't know what all the complaining's about. This is pretty simple. And now we can do it by video.
Exactly. And I'm sure you probably got busier than ever at that point too, right? Where it was like, hey, you know what? I've already embodied this transformation for maybe even years. And now, you're really a pioneer in that space. What would you say, Steve, is maybe the highest level of resistance or the rationale for resistance that you see with other lawyers? What's blocking them from buying into the use of technology?
Two things about lawyers that I've learned over the years. One, we're all skeptical of anything and everything. And that's by nature. I mean, our job is to point out risk to clients and how to avoid those risks. So it's right to be skeptical. And we're all independent. We all think we're special snowflakes, that our way of doing things is the only way that works. And unlike a corporation where you have a CEO and various levels of authority, I mean, if CEO says, we're going to buy Apple laptops, then that's it. In a law firm, a managing partner can say, we're going to buy Apple laptops, and maybe after 2 years of infighting, that happens because of that independent. So not only are we just independent by nature, but a lot of the law firm business structure enables that independence. So, trying to herd all those cats into a certain way of doing things and using certain tools is hard. And I say that, the joke that I always heard is lawyers are like herding cats, which is an insult to the cats, which I think is sort of true. And then you add to that, the nature of the work that we do is pretty demanding and pretty exacting. And being wrong about something, relying on a technology that creates a bad result, you just can't do it. And so it's not like the being perfect is the enemy of good. Perfect, it's sort of our watchword because that's what our clients expect, and that sometimes makes adoption difficult. So you've got the independence factor, you've got this need that technology has to work this time and every time perfectly, which is, as you and I and most people know, that's not what technology is. I mean, there's always glitches in technology, so that's a hurdle. And then, for some lawyers in some firms, we can't ignore the business model, the billable hour model, which you go in and say, I've got a tool that's going to enable you to, get all this work done in half the time. And the lawyer says, I can't bill all that time anymore, right? Well, no. So Now, a lot is made of that. And I will put a caveat on that. In my experience, if you ask a room full of very talented, high-end lawyers, and I'm in one or two organizations of lawyers of that caliber, if you ask them, do you have time to do everything you think needs to be done for your clients? Every one of them would say, absolutely not. I can't meet every need. I can't perform at the level that I'd like to perform, even though they're doing great jobs. They say I can't do everything I want to do for my clients because I just don't have time. So the billable hour model is an impediment, but for really good lawyers, I don't think that they factor that in. It's not like they say, I don't want your tool because it's going to cut down on my billable hours. They say, I want your tool because it works. It's going to help me get work done and make a better result. For good lawyers, the billable hours take care of themselves. But as an industry, we've sort of overbuilt in a lot of ways because that's how we made a lot of money, frankly. And so it's a bit of an issue. The hangover from that is a bit of an issue because you've got law firms with billable hour quotas and demands. And so it's very, very tempting for some lawyers not to use tools that will reduce the billable hours because they have goals they got to make and they can't make them otherwise. So
it's funny. One of my original coaches always said to me, the billable hour, and so accountants aren't far off of that, right? I think a lot of accountants are still doing billable rates, which we are. Like there's some element of it that still exists, but a lot of it is more fixed fee, fixed pricing, value pricing model. But I remember my coach saying, the hourly rate times the number of hours just encourages you to be inefficient with your time, right? The more inefficient you are, the more money you make.
Right.
And that always sort of stuck with me, right? It's like, okay, so the outcome is no different, but if we're inefficient, we're more profitable and it costs the client more money. I always thought that was a strange thing, and I didn't really think about it until he had pointed it out. I was like, yeah, that model is a little bit strange. So
it's like,
to use technology to create that.
You're going to get your house painted and the painter says, hey, Bob, you don't mind, I'm just going to bill you by the hour. You go, are you out of your oven loving? Do you think I'm going to pay you by the hour to paint my house? You're crazy.
Yeah, but take all the time you need. Take all the time you need, but this is what I'm paying you.
And part of it, though, is the entire culture of most law firms, not plaintiffs' contingency firms, of course, but most law firms for years has been billable hour model. It's how lawyers advance. It's how their lawyers are valued. It's how they're compensated. The whole thing, the whole culture revolves around billable hours, and so that's hard to get rid of. And then on the flip side of that, for clients, particularly corporate clients, in-house counsel, many of them have come from worked in law firms, and are kind of imbued with that culture, and it's often hard for them to change. Back in the early 90s, I actually did a flat fee on a national engagement for 2 years. And it was a very interesting experience because as soon as I got into it, a lot of my notions about what to do, how to staff, what to keep track of completely flipped. And so instead of thinking, this case is going to take 20 hours to get to completion, I wanted to say, how can we get that case to completion in 3 hours? Because that's how we made more money. And so we did a lot of things. We ended up actually putting together a program that got cases into mediation much faster and got them resolved much faster. But basically, we ran out of cases before we did anything else. But the reaction to it was interesting. A lot of I needed associates to work on cases. I needed competent, really good associates to work on cases. I got a lot of pushback from them because, they said, look, Steve, we'd love to work on the case. Sounds really interesting, but we've got quotas, billable hour quotas we've got to make. And yet you're telling us, get this done faster, more efficiently than otherwise. And so, and then on the other hand, you had people who part of the problem, who would spend whatever time it took and more because nobody was
Right.
really looking at the hours, so they could make themselves look more valuable. But the really interesting thing about that, keep in mind this was in the early '90s, not too many people were doing it. I went out and tried to sell that to other clients after that for years. Say, I've got an idea how we can get your case resolved much better and more efficiently. Let's do it on a flat fee. And we go through the whole thing. And at the end of it, they would always say, that's really a great idea, Steve, but we just can't do that. We got to do it by the hour.
Yeah. We want you to bill us by the hour.
Right.
Yeah.
But I would also point out that now for some types of cases, if I were an in-house counsel and I had a bet the company case, I would say you're billing by the hour because I want no stone unturned. And if the bill versus the exposure doesn't make any difference, I would rather you do things you may not necessarily need to do, but could lead to something, than try to do it for less. So those kinds of cases, that billable hour makes sense. But I think we're rapidly reaching a point in the trajectory of the profession where it doesn't make as much sense. Now, how many people are going to adopt it and how they're going to go there, that remains to be seen. But it is I think it's an inflection point in a lot of ways.
Well, and then I was going to ask, what that next step looks like, but I just want to point out that you're the chair-elect of the American Bar Association's Law Practice Division, right? Like this sounds like an extremely heavy title of influence in your space, right? So for, looking at innovative practices and leaders of initiatives and some of this change, like you're going to be involved with this in some way. So what does this evolution look like in the next 5 to 10 years, Steve, like as far as billing models go?
I would point out that I'm the former chair of the LP decision. My term ended, a year or so ago. So, but that doesn't change the question. And I think we don't know yet, frankly, what's going to happen. And we don't know yet in part because the AI technology is evolving so quickly. So if you were to say today, okay, let's make a plan assuming that the AI technology and Gen AI technology is what it is right now, that could be a crappy plan because a year from now it's going to be completely different. As a profession, there's some things that we need to concentrate on. And one is to think, what exactly is it that we as human lawyers can do that Gen AI won't be able to do? We recently completed our tech show, which the LP division puts on every year. We had a couple of keynotes. One was by Jordan Furlong, and both the keynotes. The other one was by Nalay Patel, who's the co-founder of The Verge, and both of them sort of came to the same place. What and I found this over my career. What clients want from their lawyers are first competence, but that's a given. We got a case one time. It was a huge case, a terrorist kind of case, and the client put on asked several firms to come in for a dog and pony show. We were the only firm that was not from New York that went to the dog and pony show. We got the case years later. I asked the client, I said exactly what it was. What was it that made you select us? And he said, well, we knew you were competent. All the firms were competent, but he said, if we had to be in a foxhole with a group of lawyers for the next 5 years fighting this case, we'd just as soon be with people we liked, people we like being around, people whose company we enjoy. And so the point of that, though, is something that Furlong and Patel hit on, and that is clients want competence, yes, but they want somebody that's going to understand their problems, be empathetic with their problems, and is going to be there with them through every step of the way. Who's not going to say, "Oh, we can't do that," or "Oh, geez, I understand how you want this to turn out. It can't happen." The better way is say, okay, that we understand how you want this to turn out. Let's work together and figure out how we're going to get there. It may not end up exactly as you want, but we're not going to say you can't do it. We're not going to say no. And that's the thing that I think lawyers often forget. I was very, very aggressively tried to understand what a client's problem was when it came to these mass tort cases. A lot of it often was their fear of their product would get slammed in the marketplace and they'd lose market share. And that's a huge concern. But I try to understand that, and I try to relate to what it was they wanted, both on an individual level, on a professional level, and an individual level. And a partner, and I wrote about this, and when I wrote about the keynotes at a tech show, but I had a partner who every Christmas he would give client reps that he worked with in a particular company a book. That was his Christmas present. And he didn't just give them any book. He understood, because he talked to them, spent time with them, listened to them, knew their likes and knew dislikes. He knew the book that would resonate with them individually. And that was the book that he got them. And that to me, that's an important lesson about where we want to go in the future as a profession and where our value is, to be able to have that kind of understanding that you can know your client well enough to not only know, how to practice a case, but what they're interested in, what their mindset is, what their concerns are, what their life is like. And I don't think maybe someday ChatGPT can replicate that, but I don't think it's going to be this week.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think, even I watched and I love the new generation coming up, by the way. Like, this is not necessarily a criticism, but you see how they've grown up with their communication channels, definitely more tech phone-based conversations, text message. Not a lot of them are jumping on, taking a phone call or even meeting in person. And I truly believe the differentiating factor of businesses that are going to excel, yes, we have to embody the technology and the AI. We can't ignore it. But those that can really master relationship skills and value add are really going to be the people who win. And I know, lawyers, no different than accountants, we're key advisors to people, and the AI is only as good as the questions it's being asked. And I feel like we're almost interpreters in a relationship-based model where we need to understand the needs so that we can use the AI to come up with the best or formulate the best solutions or research in the best way, but you have to know the right questions to ask. And I say that, obviously we're in the tax space as well. And, I see some different AI softwares coming out that are doing tax returns from start to finish for individuals. And, you ask the question is, okay, well, what about this particular incentive that's available? If they bought a commercial property, are they aware that there's a $45,000 government incentive that could be available in this filing? If you don't ask or you don't bring up the fact that you have this property, the AI is not going to pick that up. And I think that's, the value of the professional is still going to be there based on relationship, trust, and prompting in the right way or knowing the right questions to ask. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that too, but I'm starting to get a little bit more passionate about it, Steve, as I'm getting older here.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And, and I'm sure you've experienced this. A lot of times, and my clients were corporate clients, make no mistake. I mean, I was working with, some of the leading Fortune 100 and 500 firms. But a lot of times, even their representative, they just wanted somebody to vent to. They just wanted somebody to just say, God damn it, it's not right. And, I don't know if, and pardon my language, but that's part of it. And so as lawyers and as accountants, well, you mentioned tax, when we were talking beforehand, I said, I don't know anything about tax other than, tomorrow's the 15th and I just got an email that, I have to pay some tax in. But that's part of it. I was going to call the guy and say, well, exactly why do I have to pay? It doesn't seem right, and, you say that to an AI and it just, say that's because, Steve, you have to pay it because you made so much money. But a lot of it is, you just want to be there for the client to vent and to show their outrage and why they think it's unfair and then to guide them through that process so that they don't go too far off the deep end. But so it's understanding the client, knowing what to ask, and listening. A lot of it is just listening, a skill that I've seen too many lawyers not have. And it's, if you talk to your friends and acquaintances about very much about lawyers, and these would be individuals, the woman who needs a divorce, or the guy that's got a property dispute with his neighbor, and ask them their opinion of lawyers, what you hear back is not pretty. I mean, it's, I went to call the lawyer, and first thing they wanted was a $5,000 retainer. What, to get a property dispute resolved? They want $5,000 off the bat, and if they don't spend the $5,000, they're keeping it. And then they're going to bill me by the hour on top of it, and then you got to get a bill from them, and it's got, 10 hours for research. Like, what? Oh, you can't. So, we don't have a very good reputation among many individuals, and rightfully so, because we don't listen to our clients and what they really want, what they need. I'm sure I've been guilty of it too, but listening and asking questions, you're right, is key, and it's going to continue to be key. And even on the flip side of that, if you want to use an AI tool effectively, you have to know how to ask the right question, right?
Exactly.
Because,
That's exactly it.
It's a funny thing. I attended a conference last year of the American Association of Law Librarians, which they're a very knowledgeable group because they understand lawyers, they understand needs. It's not a librarian in a sense. They're really knowledge management people. But at one of the sessions, one of the presenters says, what I have noticed about the use of AI by lawyers is the older, more experienced lawyers, once they understand the AI tool, they are much better at the prompts and asking the questions and knowing how to elicit what they want and need. And she said, and more importantly, they understand when they get an output if it just doesn't look right. There's something wrong with it. That case that doesn't sound like a decision a judge would make. So they see these things, and so it's going to be important, I think, in the future for us to cultivate the kind of skills that those lawyers have now based on their experience with younger people who are, much too tempted to just go ask ChatGPT and get an answer and run with it. So that's a challenge that we're going to have to meet if we're going to have good lawyers in the future. I went off on a tangent, I know, but
no, that's okay. It's interesting. Like, I don't know if you're anything like me, but my kids and my wife make fun of me all the time and you sort of reference the older lawyers using it in the right way. I have conversations with ChatGPT and Claude, really, explaining to them what it is that and the rationale as to why I'm looking for a solution. And it comes back and it's really detailed, and to your point, I understand what it is that I would be looking for. I'm almost wanting them to recite it back to me almost as affirmation, or to write it out so that I don't have to write it out. It's interesting. My kids make fun of me all the time, but they would approach it in a different way. But you know what? I'm really enjoying the use of it. And I think I mentioned to you before, we do a lot of work with different legal software companies, helping migrate their data from one solution to another. And one group that we work closely with is Clio. And I remember I was at the ClioCon a few years ago, and Jack Newton, the CEO, he said, AI is not going to replace lawyers. Lawyers who use AI are going to replace those that don't. And I felt like that was a really insightful way to think of almost every industry, to say, you know what, it's here to help support us, not to eliminate us, maybe create some efficiency, but maybe we could just get more outputs along the way. What do you see as a risk heading forward in the legal industry with the adoption of AI at such a fast pace?
Sound kind of silly. I mean, the biggest threat is the threat. And by that, I mean concluding that this is such a threat that we have to do something about it to slow it or stop it. That's the threat, because we're not going to slow it. We're not going to stop it. It is here. It is here to stay, and it's going to change many of the things that we do. Just like the telephone changed the practice back in the whenever that was. And, I've read accounts about that time, and a lot of lawyers at the time said, we'll never use a phone in the practice because our clients want to come in and see us and talk to us in person.
Yeah.
That turned out well, didn't it? Right.
Yeah.
So just like with that, it's going to change a lot of things. What I think that we have to recognize is it is going to change, and how we need to adopt our training, how we need to adopt the way we approach technology, how we need to adopt skills relating to clients better. And I think, to kind of go back to a point I made earlier, often I'm asked by younger lawyers, well, what do I need to do? And I always tell them, as I said before, be an entrepreneur. And when it comes to technology, I think the same thing applies to all of us. We have to be entrepreneurs about technology and how it can help us not run from it, but run to it in a way that enables us to better serve our clients. Again, that doesn't mean ignoring the risks and ignoring the downsides. It makes stuff up on occasion. In fact, it hallucinates. And I just wrote an article about this based on some interesting research from a group out of Georgetown, some engineers focusing on the legal issue. And one of the things that they noted is, we shouldn't think of hallucinations as just this sort of random event. It's an engineering flaw in the system. It's the way the system is built. So now we know that it's just not going to, happen. It's a flaw. So when does that flaw manifest itself? And so we can define when it manifests itself. If we know that, then we can better handle the hallucinations. And it turns out the flaw manifests itself when you ask the system a novel question, a question for which there's really no easy answer from the internet. If you ask ChatGPT to explain the holding in Marbury versus Madison, they'll do a great job because there's 10 gazillion articles written about that case, one of the most important cases in American jurisprudence. But if you ask it, what's going to happen in my case of Smith versus Jones next week, and because it's engineered to answer, it will give you an answer, and in its mind, if you say it's got a mind, that's a wrong way to look at it. But the way it's set up, it's going to say, well, what would a case probably say, and what would that case's name probably be? Because it's just predicting. And so there you go. Here you go, Bob. Here's a case.
Yeah, 100%. Well, hallucinations, I think, is a huge risk. And I am aware of a certain case with a New York lawyer presenting to a judge case law that didn't exist in precedence, and actually lost his license to practice law based on it. And I think it's a fairly popular case in understanding how to utilize AI or how not to. There's one of the risks is that AI will hallucinate. It will create answers because it needs, it's programmed to provide solutions, even if it has to make them up. And we need to be careful. And that's, again, asking the right questions, I think is super important.
Part of too is, we and I do this with ChatGPT, you probably do too. You start thinking of it as a person. And so you say, thank you very much, or, sorry to bother you. I know you're busy, but I got this little, issue. But
I know, I constantly think in my mind, I need to stop maybe being so polite and wasting time saying please and thank you to ChatGPT. Yeah.
Right. But, the problem with that is if you ask an associate to do research on a project, there's no way in hell that associate will give you a made up case. This is not going to happen, right? Because if they do, they're fired, right? If ChatGPT does it, you just say, damn you, I'm turning you off for a day. What a big deal. But the point is, it's really got no sort of scruples associated with it. It doesn't have any penalty, it doesn't say, like a human would say, okay, I can't do that. Maybe I can fudge this a little bit, but I can't just make it up. But there's no preventing the Gen AI tools from doing it, and not because they're evil, but that's how they're made. It is an engine, like the researcher said, it's an engineering flaw.
Yeah, well, and ethics, taking into consideration the ethical approach to one situation over another, how do you prioritize ethically one outcome over another, which may not align with how you or I would do it, but it would be different if they were to do it. It's, we could probably go down that path a long way,
Right.
but it's kind of scary, and even thinking about self-driving vehicles, how ethically a self-driving vehicle makes a decision of whether to swerve to miss a person or an animal, or, which one would it choose to not swerve away from if you had to? Do you save the driver? Do you,
Right.
like there's a lot of things that come into question. I think, in the practice of law and the practice of tax, I think there's a lot of ethical requirements that they, can't even really be taught.
Right.
It has to be, and so much of it is based on professional judgment. It's like, how do we create that? Anyway, Steve, I have a bunch of rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
All right. So quick questions, quick answers from you. AI in law, what's the biggest opportunity or the biggest disruption?
Biggest opportunity is automating various tasks and getting information quickly that heretofore took forever. Data
and
analytics.
Now you did this a long time ago as well, right? So it's like you were the forefather of AI creating automations for us, right?
Right.
Back to your legal secretary who did such a great job back then. The one legal tech tool every firm should be using already.
ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity or any one of those publicly facing ones, with, of course, the various caveats of how not to use them. If you don't use them at all, you don't even have an appreciation of what they could do or what more sophisticated tools could do. And so you have to start someplace. Do something with them, even if it's, what's the best way to get from point A to point B, which, by the way, it doesn't really do particularly good at.
But it will, what it does do really well for me, I think social media is fantastic, where I would write something out and the perfectionist, especially being a professional, you would write it out 5 times, you'd edit it, you'd be thinking, oh, how do I make this sound better? Throw it in there and you say, this is how I want it to sound for these reasons. And it's really good at saving our time with perfectionism, I feel, it's super helpful.
Where I found it really helpful is like marketing material. Like I have to give a presentation next week, what about points or what is my outline? Or for me, because I hate doing PowerPoints, which I think of the world's God's worst creation of the universe, now you can't, it's not perfect. You have to sort of tweak them, but those kinds of things where the risks of making a mistake are pretty low.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you can proofread it as well still, but you can do it quickly, and, it can evaluate any of the previous historical posts for, things that would pick up or have a greater reach, or, even hashtags and all that stuff. So, yeah.
I would point out one thing in that regard. I've gotten pretty good at reading social media posts that are entirely written by ChatGPT, and some of which are authored by people that I've really respected and thought a lot of. And I just cringe when I see that. It's like, you're not even going to take the time to write it yourself, or at least work on it or edit it so it doesn't sound like it came. Then why do it? I mean, forget it. I mean, those one-line sentences. Saying the quiet. Anytime I see it, and Kat Moon is a friend of mine. She's a professor at Vanderbilt. She wrote this thing the other day about anytime I see the word quiet in a media post, I'm suspicious. So I'll never use the word quiet. Saying the quiet part out loud. I mean, it's just like, oh,
right. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
Okay. Billable hour, outdated or evolving?
Evolving. As I said before, there'll always be a place for the billable hour model, particularly in very large bet-the-company cases. But I think it's going to have to evolve because clients are going to demand it ultimately for various reasons, not the least of which is cost pressure.
Absolutely. The biggest mistake lawyers can make when adopting new technology?
FOMO.
Fair.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I see this a lot. A lot of firms think, "Oh, we got to have some AI tools, so let's go out and get some," without really saying, "What is it we want them to do? We want the tools to do. How are they going to help us? And how intuitive is it to use them?" So then they get something that nobody can use, and it doesn't do anything that really helps anybody. So they've just spent a bunch of money for nothing, and then everybody's mad at that point, except the vendor who they're happy. I guess.
Well, I don't know if you've had this too, but I know CRM platforms. Looking at those, I've spent, I'm going to say, months researching and trying to find which one was going to be the perfect tool for us and our firm. And ultimately, there's no perfect tool, right? You want to find one that's really good and seems to fit and move forward with it. And, don't start getting distracted by the shiny object syndrome of all the other tools that are there. Pick something that seems reasonable and move forward with it. It's you can really find yourself spinning with all the options and all the new technology that's coming out.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, it's and vendors prey on that. I have a friend who's into marketing, and she will go to one of these shows and walk up to a booth, and they'll say, "Let me show you the demo," and she was so like, "Don't you want to know something about what I do and what I need before you just slap me with a demo and think I'm going to buy it? Are you, But they do that because it works, I guess. But it's that's the critical inquiry before you start is, what's it going to do and what problem is it going to solve?
Exactly. Steve, this has been so valuable. Thank you for a great conversation. Yeah, I do want to ask one last question of you, and I like to ask this, thinking of your career, your profession, the evolution from where it started to where it is now. If you had one piece of advice for starting out, Steve, back in that, the entry-level firm where you were an associate, and you could give yourself some guidance back then, what would that piece of advice or what would that guidance be?
I guess it would be along the lines that I said. I always thought of myself, well, not always. I came to learn that thinking of myself as an entrepreneur, this is my business. I am my business. Whether I'm in a big firm, small firm, on my own, my business is me. My brand is me. Thinking of yourself that way leads you to opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise see. Instead of thinking, how is this going to get me my path to partner, you're thinking, how is this going to enhance my career that I want to have? So now, having said all that, to come back to your question, it just dawned on me that one of the things I wished I would have done sooner is to have defined where I wanted to go a little bit better, because there was a period of time there where I was floundering around. A mistake I made to going to a smaller firm. If I had thought about what I really wanted to be and where I wanted to get to a little bit more, I wouldn't have made that mistake. But it was like, sounds great, back hometown where I want to be, and everybody will be happy. And so yeah, that's, I think those two cornerstones are pretty important for a career.
Absolutely. Now you publish Tech Law Crossroads, which is your blog. Tell me a little bit about that.
I started it maybe 10 years ago, and I used to write pretty religiously for it. Then about a year ago, I started writing for Above the Law a lot more. And so most of my pieces for Above the Law also appear on my blog. But it's the Above the Law pieces are the things that I would have put on the blog, standalone pieces I would have put on the blog before, but they're still there. And every now and then I'll throw in something that has less to do with technology and more to do with other stuff. I wrote 2 articles, the past end of last year on what I'd learned about traveling over my career, which is a whole lot. And so I had like 10 tips in one and then 10 tips in the other. And there was just fun things to write, and that kind of things, I still put up some of that on the blog. So yeah, most of the stuff is all on the blog. It's also on Above the Law, and which has been a really cool gig. Great people to work for, and it's a good audience. And so it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you again, Steve. This has been great. For everybody who watched, this has been the Wealthy Entrepreneur Podcast. Essentially, our goal here is to empower entrepreneurs, legal professionals with the financial confidence and the knowledge they need to be successful in their business, in their ventures, because truthfully, entrepreneurs are the most powerful group of humans moving the world forward in a positive way, and super grateful for the opportunity to continue to serve that market. Listen, Steve has shared so many insightful ideas with technology, the ideas about how to find, your true purpose, and truly understanding some of the legal professional and where AI is taking the market. There's been so many great insights. If you have any sort of takeaways from this, grab this, share it out. Our goal is to maximize the impact of the information that we're sharing out. Leave a comment, ask any questions. We'll make sure we get either Steve or our team will reach out and answer those. Ultimately, we want to maximize the reach that we have. Once again, everybody, I appreciate your time, your energy, and joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you once again next week.